All right, Book of Romans. Book of Romans. Book of Romans. Go ahead and have that open. All right, as you open to the book of Romans and we try to figure out exactly how we're going to approach this morning, I think the best way to start this morning is by taking a few seconds just to consider what's going on around us right now in our world. Obviously, we know things are pretty crazy. We can look at the protest, we can look at the riots, and I know everyone has an opinion, and sadly, how many Christians are engaging the discussions about the riots and the protest and what happened to George Floyd is they are demonstrating that they are not thinking about this anyway from a biblical or theological perspective, but they're thinking it from a cultural or political perspective, which I continue to try to challenge Christians, stop doing that. Because when we look at what's happening in the world right now, what we should all say as Christians is you're absolutely right. Things in the world right now are not right. Things are not good. And I understand that you want justice and you want this and you want that. We can all agree that the world is not a perfect place, and there's times there is injustice, there is times that there is murder, there is times that there is racism, there are times that there are things happen that are completely horrible and tragic. But the question is, one, how do we judge something to be evil or wrong? What standard are we utilizing to judge something as being wrong? That's the first question Christians should be asking people, instead of arguing it from a political standpoint. And two, the second question we should ask is, why is everything in the world so messed up? We should try to get people to think about the issues from a theological perspective, but what we tend to do is we start acting crazy, and it's like, it's weird how Christians will respond, this person died. Well, this many people died this way, and this many people died this way. Well, we would not do that, hopefully, if Brenda came up to me and said, hey, someone in my family died, hopefully I wouldn't say, a lot of people die a lot of other ways, so you really should get over it. Right? Hopefully we wouldn't respond that way, correct? Right? One death is horrible, and we should address that instead of making it, look over here, look over there, look over there. But Christians want to jump into all of these other debates. We need to stop and think about it theologically. Right? Amen? We need to think about it from a biblical perspective. So I want you to consider that we can all agree this morning that there's something wrong in the world, and everybody can say, amen. Yes? And we need to figure out what is wrong. Now this morning, in Sunday school, for the Bible Institute, we were in Genesis chapter 3, which tells us what happened, right? We started seeing how it happened. Well, this morning we're going to be in Romans, and we're going to start looking at what happened from a theological perspective. Genesis tells us kind of what happens from a historical narrative perspective. Romans is going to jump into a theological perspective. All right? And I want you to just realize this, that in the world, I know you all know this, but I want you to just realize this, that before today is over, according to the 2018 average, 155,520 people will die. 155,520 people will die today. Tomorrow, 155,000 people will die. That is the average number of deaths per day. That was the average in 2018. I think 2019 was pretty close to the same number. Don't know what 2020 will be. That's a lot of people. That means death is what? Reigning. Very good. Someone's using the word that we've already discussed in regards to Romans chapter 5. Death is reigning. Death is a reality. Death is present. And it's so weird that 155,000 people die every day, but as soon as someone dies somewhere close to us, we are always what? Shocked by it. As if, wait, how did it happen? Death is a reality that nobody likes, nobody wants, but it's going to happen. I did not think that as a teenager, my mom would die before she got to the age of 40. I wasn't prepared that day I went to school to get called to the principal's office, and next thing you know, I'm standing in a hospital room, and that's it. My mom's gone. Didn't realize that. I had no idea that a friend that I was on the school bus with when I was in, 6th grade, 7th grade, I was on the school bus with, and when he got ready to get off the school bus, he said, hey, goodbye, and then got off the school bus, and I'm like, that's weird, goodbye? And then next thing you know, I'm outside in front of my house playing football, and an ambulance goes by. Next thing you know, I found out he went home and hung himself. Wasn't really prepared for that. Now, you've all got stories where how death has touched your lives. We're not prepared for it. But death is a reality. Death is a reality. And we have to live today with the idea that death is coming. And you don't know when it's going to get here. Your parents, your children are going to pass. Children, your parents are going to pass. It's a reality. We don't like it. So we all know there's something wrong in the world. And we all know death is a reality. Why? How come? How does it get here? How do we explain? That's what the world needs answers to. Well, I would love to be able to open up our Bibles, jump into Romans chapter 5 and go Romans 5, 12 through 21, and just give you simple answers like most pastors would do. The only problem is I can't do that. And the reason I can't do that is Romans chapter 5, verses 12 through 21 is one of the most difficult passages in the entire Bible. And Romans chapter 5, verse 12 may be one of the most difficult verses in the entire Bible because no one in church history can agree. And guess what I like to do? I don't skip the problem. I don't hide the problem. What do? I bring the problem right here, and what do I do with the problem? I hand it to you. And why do I hand it to you? Because I'm very different than other pastors. Other pastors seem to think the people are too dumb to deal with the problems. I don't believe you're too dumb. Now, you may not be willing, you may be lazy and not willing to deal with the problem, but you're definitely smart enough to figure out the problem. That's the way I view it. So I bring the problem here. Now, I know sometimes you would prefer me not to bring the problem and you would just want a sermon. Well, that's probably you're in the wrong church if that's what you want, right? Because we're going to dig in and we're going to try to figure this out. So is everyone ready for a major headache before the day is over? I hope so. So let's start. Why I started the way I started is I want you to realize that all of this theological difficulty we're going to have to work through, all of this church history fighting that we're going to have to work through, we're working through it because it relates to real life. The world's messed up, everyone should say. Death happens 155,000 times a day. Now, that's real, right? That's tangible. That's not theological. That's not for a seminary classroom. That's real life. Romans 5 comes along and says, hey, guys, while the world is on fire and everything's crazy, here's a theological explanation, I'm going to lose my voice, to what happened and why it happened. So that should make it what? Practical and relevant, and why you should want to understand it. Everybody say amen to that? Good. I need you to say amen while I drink water. I need one of those churches where everybody applauds for like 3 minutes. All right, there we go. All right, everybody ready? That's the best way I could introduce this because I wanted to try to make it practical. Here we go. Let's go to Romans chapter 5. Oh, this is going to be so much fun. All right, here we go. Romans chapter 5. We're going to look at verse 12. Now, I know I should try to break down 12 through 21 in some kind of outline form, but we're not going to follow that, okay? We're going to work through this section. If you remember last week, I gave you an introduction to the difficulty that we are about to face, and I gave you some things to look for. Everybody remember those things I gave you to look for? Okay? I gave you how many things to look for in Romans 5, 12 through 21 to get you prepared for this difficulty? What's the first thing I told you to look for? The word one. Okay, the second thing I told you to look for? The contrast of the two. Right? Okay, you look for the word one, and that word one is used to contrast the two. Number 3. Okay, we identify with one of the ones, which makes us a part of the contrast of the two. Next, the rain. We have different things reigning here, right? Next. The much more, right? Those are the things I told you to look for just to get you ready for the difficulty. Now we're going to jump into the middle of the difficulty, all right? And we're going to be confronted with one of the things I've already told you to look for, all right? Here we go. Romans chapter 5, verse 12. Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that, see those two words? For that. That's where all the debate has arisen in church history. For that, next words, all have sinned. For that, all have sinned. Does anyone know what the theological struggle is with this verse? All right, let's break it down simply. Now we're going to go back and break this. This is what we're going to do. We're going to move a little forward, then we're going to go back. Okay? So let's try to break this down. And hopefully before this is over, you can grasp everything you need to grasp. If we look at this verse and break this down, okay, what is the first thing that is identified here? What's the first thing that's identified in verse 12? One man. One man. Now we'll go into greater detail here, but we know who that one man is, right? Adam. Now it's weird that the one man gets the blame here and not the woman, but that's a whole different subject for right now. But we know the one man. So no one debates who the one man is, right? Because this one man is involved with doing what? Sin entered into the world. The one man somehow is responsible for bringing sin where? Into the world. Not that he created sin, but that he brought the concept of sin into this world, all right? And we could get into a whole discussion there, all right? Does anyone have a problem? No one has a problem with that. Now, some may have a problem with it, because if you've been following along in the Bible Institute, you'll know that some believe that between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, a judgment occurred on this earth because there was a cataclysmic judgment because there was some kind of sin. Well, you can't have sin before the one man, because the one man brought sin into the world. If you had a cataclysmic judgment on sin on this earth, then that means there's already been sin here. So some would even argue that, but that would seem to debunk that. Remember, that's known as the gap theory for those who don't remember, all right? So one man brings sin into the world. Still no problem, right? Now, what happens as a result of sin coming into the world? Death. Everybody see that? Death by sin, and so death passed upon all men. Nobody has a problem with this. Sin, right? A gap theory, you have death even before that, but okay. So you have death, and death is because sin entered into the world. So far, so good, right? Because what can we all agree on? We can all agree people die. Now, some people will argue people die just because of biological reasons and it has nothing to do with sin. Christians would argue the reason people die is because of sin. Sin entered into the world, and now death is present. But here is where the problem lies. Everybody ready? Death by sin, so death passed upon all men. For that, next three words, all have sinned. That's where the debate gets. What is going on? What is this saying? So we're going to take a journey through church history really quick, and we're going to try to explain this. But let me do this. Now, I don't want to put you on the spot, and I know that we're live on the air, and you don't want to be embarrassed around people from around the world, but they love when y'all get embarrassed, so they think it's funny, so y'all can participate in entertaining the world this morning. Okay, when you read verse 12, and it says, for that all have sinned. What do you think that means? Now, you could be 1,000% wrong, and it's perfectly okay. I won't embarrass you too much. Not right now. When we finally get to it, I will, but okay. You've all read Romans 5:12. This is not like some hidden verse that you haven't read. So you've probably read it more than once. Hopefully you've read it a couple of thousand times, okay? But if you haven't, it's been there in the Bible for a long time, like, 2,000 years, okay? But it's been there a long time, okay? So when you read that, what do you think it means? All right? So Stephen is going with the sin nature. For all have sinned, he's saying that means for all have a sin nature. Okay? You have at least one person in church history who agrees with you.
Well, I would say because this happened, we're all sinners. We all inherit death.
Okay? So you're saying because we all have a sin nature. Okay. So two people are going with the sin nature view. Okay? Anybody else got a different view? Oh, so the sin there, we've all sinned, is Adam's sin. Okay. All right. You've got someone in church history who will agree with you. Okay. Pretty much any view anyone comes up with, there's someone in church history who's going to agree with you. But I will say, Mr. Goodlett has the right person in church history. Okay. He has the right one in church history. All right. So are we ready for a view in church history? Are we ready? A journey through church history. We're going to go really quick. Right? This church, I can go quick because you already know all this stuff. All right? Let's go to, who do you think we're going to go to first? No. Pelagius. Come on, Pelagius is a major, he's big time here, right? We got to go to Mr. Pelagius, right? We all know Mr. Pelagius, right? You should name your cat or dog Pelagius, right? Especially if it's a disobedient dog and cat and doesn't listen, okay? All right, Pelagius. Now, what's a simple summary of Pelagius' theology? A simple summary. Okay, well, all right, y'all got the idea. If we're going to make it in a short sentence, Pelagius opposed the concept of original sin. He opposed the concept of original sin. Just write that down. That's a simple summary. We studied the whole life of Pelagius, if you remember. So you're already experts on him. Okay, this is how he would translate Romans 5:12. You ready? Or part of Romans 5:12. Death passed upon all men because all sin. Death passed upon all men because all sin. What does Pelagius say? Why do you die? Because you sin. Has nothing to do with Adam. Has nothing to do with Adam. Adam is not responsible. You're responsible. You die because you sin. That's Pelagius' view. Why? Because he doesn't believe Adam's sin affects what? Us. Adam just did what? Brought sin into the world. That's it. That's Pelagius' view. All right? Adam's sin affected only himself, and that every human being since Adam has chosen to sin. No original sin has been passed on to the human race. That's Pelagius' view. Now, what do we know about Pelagius in church history? He's condemned as a heretic, and we should condemn him as a heretic. Now, what's the major flaw in his view? See if you can think it through. I'm going to repeat this probably about 50 times. Thinking caps on. If I was in a seminary classroom right now, what I would do, if we were in a Bible institute right now, what I would do is say, okay, well, there's an easier way to disprove Pelagius. If I was in a Bible institute right now, I would tell you to grab a piece of paper and write a paragraph explaining to me the big flaw in Pelagius' view, and then I would go get something to drink and eat, and then come back and see how well you did. But I can't do that right now unless I'm going to wait and come back tonight, and I doubt y'all would all stay here until I come back. So. Okay, there's an easier way to show a problem. Go back to Romans 5:12. It's right there in front of you. Let's read it again. Wherefore. Well, let's read it again. Wherefore, by one man, sin entered into the world, and death by sin, so death passed upon all men. Now remember, the way he reads it, death passed upon all men because there's a problem. How many infants die every single day in the world? At birth. A day old. A week old. A month old. Did they sin? Right, but let's remember, his argument is you die because you sin. Not because you, remember, Pelagius doesn't believe in a sinful nature. There you go. Now that's how they get around it. Okay, if you heard what Robert just said, the way Pelagius people get around it, you'll see this in a lot of even churches, that age of accountability, that you don't, but again, you and that's what a lot of people do. If a child dies, it doesn't matter who the child is, they immediately go to heaven because, okay, but why did they die? Why did they die? Because if they're not accountable, they shouldn't die. Very good, Bobby, very good. Age of accountability still won't help them. They're not accountable, then why did they die? Because death is a result of? Very good. So why did children die? Well, according to the Pelagius, we don't have an answer. Right? We don't have a theological answer. In other words, a child's death would have nothing to do with sin, which then destroys the whole concept that why do people die? Sin. Right? That's Pelagius' view. All right? Now, we go from Pelagius to whom? Who do you think, if we're going to talk about Pelagius, who do we have to talk about? Augustine, right. Why do we talk about Augustine? He opposed Pelagius. There we go. Now, I just want you to understand how important Augustine is. Like, what blows my mind is that people go to church and they don't know who Augustine is. It's dumbfounding. Let me just give you an example. Here I have the Ancient Faith Study Bible. The Ancient Faith Study Bible. This is like a Bible all about church history. I want you to hear this because I love this quote, right? Augustine is arguably the most significant theological voice in church history. Augustine is arguably the most significant theological voice in church history. Now I want you to hear that. The most significant theological voice in church history is Augustine, and I don't even want to see a show of hands of how many books you guys have read of Augustine. I don't even want to know, don't want to see, because I will just fall on the floor and have a seizure. But I will argue this. If you haven't read Augustine, you're literally, your ability to argue theology is over. And here's what's sad, you haven't read Augustine, but you use his arguments all the time, okay? And you believe things that he taught you. And you say you got them from the Bible, but you probably got them from Augustine, all right? Listen how far they go here, because this is very important. His influence can be traced in different ways through pretty much every era of church history. His ideas can be found in the theologies of Aquinas, Luther, Calvin, Wesley, and pretty much every theologian of our present age. Perhaps, we won't read that part because it's going to talk about original sin. Listen, and I think this is very important. Basically, all theologies, pretty much all of theology, is a footnote to Augustine. All theology is a footnote to Augustine. Every theological belief you have is pretty much a footnote to Augustine. So, I can't even stress the importance of it. The fact that Christians don't know who he is the most embarrassing crime of the modern church. And it's hard because as a pastor, it's like, what do you do? All you can do is like, please read Augustine, please read Augustine, please read, and nobody will. So then our option is to use the pulpit to read Augustine to the church. And then you can't really always do that. But you need to know who Augustine is. Now, why is he so critical here? Why am I emphasizing him so much? Well, this entire section in this Bible has an entire article on original sin. In fact, guess how they define this? Augustine's view, or Augustine's teaching on original sin, may have been his most controversial teaching. It was controversial at his time. It's controversial today. Now, a lot of Christians say they accept it in theory. They don't really accept it in practice. Well, make it very clear. It has everything to do with Romans 5:12. But Augustine handled Romans 5:12 a little different than someone that's going to come after him. Some of you, Mr. Goodlett, he gave the Augustine view. Bobby and Stephen did not give the Augustine view. All right? What's the Augustine view of Romans chapter 5, verse 12? Are you ready? Death passed upon all men, for that in him, Adam, all have sinned. Death passed upon all men, for that in him, in Adam, all have sinned. All humanity was biologically in Adam when he fell in the garden. Thus each person, each individual, every person who's ever been born or will be born sinned in Adam. When it says all have sinned, every person sinned. And when did they sin? Genesis chapter 3. Now, young people would immediately say, that's not fair, okay? I don't like that. And I understand we don't like it. I understand we don't like it. But remember, theology is not about finding what you like. Theology is about finding what is true. The issue is it true? Now, what's the good thing about this view? What's the positive thing in regards to this view and as far as it goes to comparing it to Pelagius? Well, the positive thing is Augustine's view can explain something the Pelagian view cannot. The Pelagian view cannot explain the death of children. I'm going to keep coming back to that over and over and over and over again. Augustine's view can. Every young person here, no matter how young they are. Levi, okay, guess what? He's guilty. No, not a nature. This is guilt. Guilt. Right? Every child that you know and every young person in this church, they are guilty of sin, of an actual sin. They are guilty of Adam's sin. They sinned in Adam. So every young person is like, no, Mom, I'm pretty good. No, you're guilty. So you can now tell your children that they're guilty no matter what they've done. When they plead their innocence, you can say, no, you're guilty. Now, if the child is theologically smart, they will look at mom and dad and go, sorry, very good. Very good, right? So guess what? Everyone in the house is guilty. Everyone here is guilty. And that explains it. And that explains the death of children. And I want to make this very clear. You need that. Because when you read the Bible, you're going to come across some very disturbing information. You're going to have situations where God commands Israel to go in and to literally physically kill every man, woman, and child. And you're going to be like, that's wrong. It is wrong from a human perspective. Why can God do that? Because the child is guilty. In whom? Adam. That's the view of Augustine. Now, you'll have Christians who'll say, yeah, I'll believe in total depravity, but when you believe, no, I believe in total depravity, so you believe right now your child deserves to die, and all of a sudden they will go, wait, I'm not so down with that. And guess what? If the child is guilty in Adam, this begins to destroy the whole age of accountability garbage. Why? The child's guilty. That's why God could say, Esau, Jacob I've loved, Esau I have hated. How could he hate Esau before they were even born? Because Esau was guilty in whom? So was Jacob. But that's God's choice and mercy. Very good. Not because Jacob was better. In fact, when you read the story of Jacob and Esau, there's a part of you kind of going, Jacob is a loser. And you kind of feel bad for Esau. God doesn't choose us because we're better. Come on. Everyone should say amen, okay? All right, okay. God did not choose you because you're better. You're all a bunch of Jacobs, okay? We all are. Right? We all are. We supplant. We want our way. We deceive, okay? So there's Augustine's view, all right? Everybody understand the difference? All right, and that's very true. But I want to make sure, just so that since she's obviously listening, so just make sure she understands, we all understand. Yeah, she's got vipers and diapers, but make sure we all understand. What Augustine is emphasizing here is the guilt. The guilt of Adam's sin is our guilt. Not just the nature, but the guilt. The guilt. I want to make sure we have that down. Adam sinned, and who's guilty? We all are. That's Augustine's view. Okay. Now, yeah, we don't believe it's fair. Humanly speaking, it may not be fair. But we don't get to make the rules. Right? I mean, it's same. Children know this. Mom and dad can make a rule and you can say, it's not fair, but what's your choice? I'm 6. I'm moving out. Going to go find my own house, make my own way, and make my own rules. Okay. Well, you're 6. Okay. And then guess what happens? As soon as you move out to go make your own rules, you got to get a job, and then guess what happens? They give you a rule, and you're like, I don't want any rules. Well, then you got to create your own universe and become God. And well, you don't have that option, so it doesn't work that way, okay? So there's Augustine. Now, who comes after Augustine? Now, much later. Okay? John Calvin. Stephen and I think Bobby, or it may have been Diane, gave us the Calvin answer. They gave us the Calvin answer. All right, let me give you the Calvin answer. You ready? All right. John Calvin, I think we could theologically maybe be able to prove this. If you're going to give a summary of Calvin, he introduced the term sinful nature. He's going to emphasize, what did we get from Adam? This is how he would have stated it. Paul is basing the universal reign of death on the sinful nature that Adam's act created, not on individual acts of sin. So what Calvin would emphasize is, how did we sin? Why does death pass upon all of us? Because we all sin in the idea that we all have a sinful nature that we got from Adam. And therefore, because we have a sinful nature, we sin, and we're worthy of death. He would focus on the nature aspect. I'm going to argue you need both.
Still doesn't explain the infant. Because they haven't had a chance to sin.
Doesn't matter, they have a sinful nature.
Right, what I'm saying. That answers it. Or that, I'm trying to say the infant problem is still there with that.
The sinful
nature. They haven't had a chance to sin yet.
But they don't have to actually sin, because the sinful nature would still make them guilty. That's how the sinful nature would answer the infant problem. Does that make sense? Even if they haven't actually committed an act, they still have a sinful nature, therefore they're a sinner. Does that make sense? Okay. Right. Okay. Do what?
What is the difference between the sinful nature and original sin?
Okay. Now, it depends on how you define this. Typically, original sin is to refer to the fact that we are born with a sinful nature. So therefore, original sin is the nature that we are born with. The difference, some will say original sin, is that we are born originally a sinner because we are guilty in Adam. But typically, original sin is simply referring to a sinful nature. But Calvin introduced more the term sinful nature. I think originally it was used as original sin.
So in the Augustine view and Calvin view?
Okay. The Augustine view is emphasizing, I'm not saying Augustine would not go with the other part, but Augustine is emphasizing that you are guilty in Adam. Forget the nature. Forget the nature. You're guilty. whether you possess the nature or not. Does that make sense? You're guilty in Adam's actual sin. Calvin is emphasizing that you are guilty because of a nature you now possess. Does everybody understand the difference between the nature and guilt? Yes or no? Someone say no? Okay. All right, we'll think of it this way. If I go with my view, okay, or go with Augustine's view, in Adam, I committed the same sin that he committed. Therefore, I am guilty because of what he did, because that sin is my sin. I haven't done anything. I'm guilty in Adam. Yeah, I'm guilty in that sin. Nature simply refers to, doesn't matter what Adam did, what I got from Adam is not necessarily the guilt of what he did, but I get the sinful nature. So I will sin because of that nature. So one focuses on the guilt, the other one focuses on the nature. Does that make sense? Calvin would argue that nature makes us guilty. Yes, but it's making us guilty because of what we possess. We got it from Adam, but we're guilty because of the nature. It's not focused on the fact that we are guilty in what Adam did. There's a small distinction there. All right? Now, I'm not trying to argue that Augustine didn't have some of the same ideas. I'm just trying to show you the differences in emphasis. Does that make sense? Like if you look in some systematic theologies, they'll have a chart, and they'll give you these distinctions that I'm giving you. All right? In fact, I know the chart from some systematic theology. I don't know which one. All right? Does everybody understand that? Right? Guilt. Adam committed a sin, and who's guilty? We all are. We're actual guilt, like you actually committed that sin. Nature simply means Adam sinned, and then what did I get from Adam? A sinful nature, and that sinful nature makes me what? Guilty before God. Not because of what Adam did, but because I now possess that nature, I'm guilty before God because my nature makes me unacceptable before a holy God. One is focusing on the guilt, the other one is focusing on the nature. I will argue theologically, you need both concepts. I believe we're guilty in Adam, but I believe we also inherited a sinful nature that makes us guilty. I think you need both. Exactly. Augustine would be making the argument, even if you don't have a sinful nature, guess what? You're still guilty in Adam. Very good. Very good. Right, and that's how come a child can die. Both Augustine and Calvin can explain the death of a child. Pelagius can't. All right. There's a fourth view, and this one's a little confusing. All right? We're going to write down the name Douglas, and I believe the way you pronounce his last name is Moo, M-O-O. Right? I know you're all very familiar with his writings. No, okay, nobody is. Okay, all right. All right, he would be the modern would be a modern day theologian, all right? Someone who would be given a modern day view. Now, this view is really weird, okay? I don't even know how to explain this view, but we'll try, all right? This one would say that Romans 5:12 is borrowing from a Jewish concept. A Jewish concept of corporate responsibility. Of corporate responsibility. And that the idea within Judaism is that if one, it's kind of like in the military. If you've been to basic training, they do this in basic training. All right? For some weird reason, someone in basic training, someone's not doing something right. They're not folding their clothes right. They have a problem getting up in the morning. They can't march. They can't do push-ups. They can't do sit-ups. They can't run. And guess what happens? Because someone can't do push-ups, guess what we all have to go do? 500 push-ups. And now, sadly, it leads to a really bad thing that happens in the military, okay? It's not a very good thing because sometimes that individual will then receive some extra, how could we say it, motivation, right? People take off their padlocks from their locker. You put it in a pillowcase, and then you go there in the middle of the night and hold the person down, and you all beat them with the padlock and say, now, tomorrow you better do your push-ups because I'm tired of doing push-ups for you. Okay, that's not a very good thing that can happen. That's a negative thing that comes from it, but what they're trying to demonstrate is that we're all in it. So it's supposed to be a positive lesson, but it always turns into a negative lesson because really the crowd just says, kill the weak. kill the weak instead of let's help the weak. It's supposed to be a motivational thing, like, hey, we're all in this together, man. It's okay. It's okay. We got your back. But it usually turns into, like, but why? I wonder why. Oh, because we all have a sinful nature, but that's a different point. So he just believes this is a corporate responsibility, that we're all linked together, and because we're all linked together, therefore we bear the responsibility of it. In fact, then we go on to put it this way. Because all sinned means that humanity was in solidarity with Adam's sin due to his representative nature. We're just in solidarity with it. Well, what does that mean? I mean, okay, we're in solidarity. Yeah, let's all go beat up Adam. Okay, like that's a very that's kind of the political correct way. Now, this is what I want you to realize about that modern way. If a preacher says that modern way, it sounds like he's agreeing with Augustine. It may sound like he's agreeing with Calvin. That's not saying the same thing. Hey, we've all sinned because in solidarity with Adam, we bear some of the responsibility. That is not the same thing as you're guilty in Adam. That you have a sinful nature because of Adam. It sounds so good. And a lot of people would sit in a church, in a modern day church, and go, well, yeah, he's preaching the same thing. No, they're not preaching the same thing. You've got to learn to listen to those theological language has to be what? Precise. If the pastor is not giving you precise theological language, most likely you're being deceived. Now, why do many pastors not give precise theological language? A, they don't want to offend people. B, they don't want to spend the time trying to do what we're doing here, because most people wouldn't sit in a church and do what we're doing here. Right? Because most people will hear this and say, that sounds like a seminary class and not a church. Right? And that's always the criticism we get. Okay. Well, guess what? If you don't get precise, then guess what the people are? Are any of you going to go spend the rest of the next 6 months reading Augustine and Calvin and reading all the arguments about Romans 5:12? Let's all be honest. No. So if you're not going to do it, who needs to do it for you? All that big money you pay me, right? Okay, all right. I need to do it. And if I'm going to do it at home, it's got to show up at the pulpit. I'll never understand. Like, send the pastor to seminary, but when he gets to the church, don't preach what you learned in the seminary. I'll never understand that concept at all. Right? So you got your money's worth. All right. Any questions about those 4 views? Any questions? Yes? No? Oh, okay. Good call. Absolutely, yes. I believe that we need Augustine and Calvin. And I believe in a reality they both emphasize, I think they both carry the same ideas, but we just need to make sure we draw a distinction and then put them together. And we'll go into more detail. We're going to use Grudem's systematic theology at some point, and we'll go through this in a more detailed way. Right? Let me just give you how some modern commentaries handle this. All right? Here's from a modern commentary. Because all have sinned, tells why death came through sin to all human beings. Because, the word because, is an efficient way of translating a Greek phrase that means on the basis of or the fact that. That's those, and the King James says, for that all have sinned. Right? That's the 2 Greek words that caused all the problems in church history. Nobody can agree on how those 2 words should be translated. Because, and let me make this a very important point, all right? This is a very important lesson. I want everybody to listen to me. There are times in Greek and Hebrew, you've just got to get this down, where you can look up the definition of a word, and the definition of the word may have a broad range. Like, you can translate it all kinds of different ways, and then everyone will run and grab the way of translating it that fits their theological presupposition. Sometimes an argument cannot be made by simply how a word is translated. Sometimes you have to step back and look at the broader context of the verse and the broader context of the subject and try to come to the conclusion. Sometimes the mere definition of a word is not sufficient to give you a theological understanding. Some will argue the way Augustine In fact, many modern translators, I think I have a systematic theology that says the way Augustine translated that verse is completely wrong. His translation may be wrong, but theologically, I think he's right. I just think he may have mishandled the way the Greek there should have been handled. Just because it's to be handled one way doesn't necessarily mean that that proves your theology. Does that make sense? Right? Just keep that in mind, because sometimes it goes beyond just the mere definition of a word. Because words can sometimes be translated. You all know, if you've ever translated anything from English to Spanish, Spanish to English, sometimes one word can have what? A lot of different ways. And you're like, well, it could be this, and if you're not familiar with the language, and you already have an idea, you'll just go take the one that fits your idea. Now you've got to step back and go, okay, beyond the meaning of these words, what does the whole verse seem to be indicating? Does that make sense? All right. So this one's going to argue over how it should be translated. They're going to go with because. All right. They're going to use because. All right. And they say this means on the basis of the fact that. So they're going to argue that Romans 5:12, on the basis or the fact that you sinned, that's why you die. That's getting ready to be the argument they're going to make. And they're going to really stress it because of how they want to translate that phrase. Listen to what they say here. They say Paul's use of the phrase, since all have sinned, referenced everybody. Listen, they believe this references everybody having sinned individually for himself. Paul isn't talking. Hey, one of my children texts me while I'm preaching. Okay, don't you love that? Hey, no, I'm at church. Okay, all right, here we go. So make sure we understand this. Yeah, they got to know I'm not through by now. It's because we got to preach short during the COVID-19 situation. Right? It's not that God counted Adam's sin as everybody else's. Paul isn't talking here about accounting. He's talking here about invasion. Adam's sin gave sin a personified force entry into the world. A force so powerful that all sinned, with the result that death came through sin to all beings. So they go in a very lengthy discussion here to say, hey, this has nothing to do with a guilt. This has nothing to do with a nature. This has to do with the fact Adam sinned. He brought sin into the world, and guess what you do? Well, first of all, why would I sin? Why do I sin? They're making it like Adam just sinned and then we all have a choice. Well, if we all have a choice, then guess what that should mean? Somebody should be able to choose not to sin, and there's not a person in this room that can choose not to sin. You're going to sin. That's a Pelagius, and that's in a modern commentary. That's Pelagius right there, and that's present in many churches in the United States of America. All right? In contrast to that, let me read these 3 paragraphs and we'll stop. The sequence is first sin, then death. Now the death which passed over mankind had its origin in Adam's sin. Strictly speaking, there could be no individual sin till there was a law to be broken. But in the interval between Adam and Moses, before the institution of law, death prevailed over the world, which was a proof that there was sin somewhere. So what is the solution? That the sin in question was not the individual guilt of individual transgression, but the single transgression of Adam. There you have it. Right? Because in the next passages in Romans 5, it's going to argue that where there's no law, there's no sin. Well, guess what? The law doesn't show up till Moses. Well, then why were everyone dying from Genesis 4 all the way to Moses? Because there was guilt somewhere. Where was the guilt? Adam's guilt. Well, that law, yeah, that law.
So, one question I would have is if we're not all rooted in Adam,
Okay.
if another set of kids were there or some other living being was there that would not interfere with the cross, because the cross teaches us not only are we guilty, but it teaches us forgiveness through Christ, another human race from that. was in the Garden of Eden,
Right.
but we all had to fall in that.
Adam, so that we could all be saved by Christ, right? We're all guilty in one so that we can be made righteous by one, right? So, but just to make sure we understand that they're right, there was a law in the garden, but other than that, there was no other law. So all the other people who were born, there was no law. So therefore, they couldn't be considered guilty as far as breaking the law because there was no law, but they were still all dying. And they could not commit the same sin that Adam committed because they couldn't get back to the garden, right? So why were they dying? The only solution theologically is they were guilty. Not of their individual acts, but they were guilty in what Adam did. That's why they were all dropping dead. So guess what? I would have been really mad if I would have been dying, if people in my family had been dying. I'm like, where is Adam? Okay, look, they obviously didn't understand what was going on. They're just now death is just a reality and people were experiencing it, but it all went back to Adam. And then we're like, wait, we're related. So I guess I got to be mad at my own, we're all messed up in this. Okay, two more paragraphs. Rather for that, or because all sinned, not by their own individual act, but by implicity in Adam's transgression. They were summed up and included in him as the head and representative of the race. And then one more to go. For if such die, as never committed any actual sin in themselves, as infants do, then it will follow that they sinned in this one man. We're all guilty in Adam. Period. So guess what? If you're guilty in Adam, are you ready for this? I want to stress this more than I've ever stressed it. You cannot have a salvation by works. Why? Because it doesn't matter what you do. You're guilty. Does everybody understand that? You're guilty. You're like, no, I've got to be saved by my works. Your works can't make up for Adam's guilt. What does Adam's guilt require? Death. So guess what you deserve because of Adam's... You can say, man, I'm really good. Guess what you deserve? Death. Why? You're guilty in Adam. It doesn't matter what you do. You can live your life and like, I give my life to the poor. I give up all my money. I go to church. I read my Bible. I'm godly. I'm holy. You're guilty. In Adam. In Adam. So guess what you need to be saved by? If you're guilty in Adam, Mr. Goodlett brought this up, and this is where Romans 5 is going to go. What's the only hope to be saved? And the second Adam. Just as Adam's guilt is thrown on me, Christ's righteousness can be imputed to me. I'm guilty in one, and I'm forgiven in another. Much more. Remember the much more? The guilt is really bad in Adam, but much more forgiveness and grace is in Christ. We're all guilty in Adam. The only place we can run to is Christ. And then guess what? He takes care of it all. Adam's guilt, my guilt, and every other guilt. And that's the point. All right. We'll have to stop right there. All right. Any questions? You sure? So you can pass the test on Romans 5:12 now? Oh, wait. What? So if I give the test, you can't? What does that mean? Is my test not fair or something? Okay. What is that? Okay. All right. So everybody got it, right? So how did sin enter into the world? One man. Okay. And as a result of sin entering the world, what came with it? Death. And then death passed upon who? Everyone, including children. And why did it pass upon all men? For we've all sinned. And how did we sin? In Adam. So we're guilty in Adam. And what else did we get that relates to sin? A sin nature. And why? So therefore, why is a child a sinner? You're guilty in Adam. Has sin nature. Why your child sinned? Your child did not become a sinner by sinning. Your child sins because they are a sinner. Sin doesn't make you a sinner. You being a sinner by nature is what produces sin. Do you have to teach your child to lie? You have to teach him to be selfish? Mean? Cruel? No. You have to try to teach them the opposite, because what's inside of them? A sinful nature. So we are a sinner because we're guilty in Adam and because we possess a sinful nature. And because we possess a sinful nature, what is the natural reaction to or the natural outcome of our life? Sinful actions. All right, there we go. That's the best I can do to try to break that down. All right, well, if you have any questions, feel free to ask after. All right, let's pray. Lord God, we come before you this morning. One of the most important verses in the entire Bible that sets up everything we're supposed to believe in regards to salvation, in regards to your Son, in regards to forgiveness, mercy, grace, sin, our nature. Lord, I pray that we would, please, that we would meditate on this, give this much thought, that everyone here will be reading Romans 5:12 through 21 a lot this week. And if they have any questions, that we can work through these questions as we go through this very, 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 very difficult passage of Scripture. And Lord, I am thankful that we have a building and a group of people who will allow this kind of teaching, because in many places this would never happen in a church. And I am grateful that we're able to dig in and try to figure out what your word says. And we just ask this in the precious name of Jesus. And all God's people said,